There is something out there that has been watching us for longer than our civilization has existed. It does not move, it does not speak, but it remembers everything. Carved from a single ridge of living rock, it has endured floods, wars, sand, and centuries of silence. Every empire that rose in its shadow eventually crumbled. Every scholar who tried to explain it eventually gave up. And yet there it stands, older than the pyramids, older than the pharaohs, perhaps older than history itself. Tonight, we peel back the layers of time around the most mysterious monument ever created by human hands. Or were they human hands at all? Welcome to Splinters of Time.
At 73 meters long and 20 meters tall, with a face nearly 5 meters wide, the Great Sphinx of Giza is the largest and oldest monumental sculpture known to humanity. Its true name has been lost to time. The word Sphinx itself was given to it by the ancient Greeks thousands of years after it was built. In Arabic, it is called Abu al-Hol, which means Father of Terror. In ancient Egypt, it was simply the sentinel, the eternal guardian of the western horizon. What makes the Sphinx so deeply unsettling is not just its scale. It is the silence surrounding its origins. Unlike almost every other monument from ancient Egypt, not a single inscription from the Old Kingdom mentions it. No papyrus, no temple wall, no royal decree says who built it, why it was built, or when. For a civilization that recorded everything from grain inventories to love poetry, this silence is not accidental. It is deafening. The Sphinx figure itself was common in ancient Egyptian iconography. A creature with a lion's body and a human head, often bearing the face of a pharaoh, these beings were sacred symbols of the sun due to the lion's divine connection with solar energy. In Greek mythology, the Sphinx was a figure of doom and destruction. In Anatolian civilizations, similar human-headed lion figures also appear. But none of them come close to this one. This is the original, the template from which all others descend. And here is the first thing that official history struggles to explain. If the ancient Egyptians built this, why did they never write about it? The mainstream consensus holds that the Great Sphinx was built around 2,500 years before the Common Era by the pharaoh Khafre, whose true Egyptian name was Khafra, meaning appearing like Ra. The logic behind this attribution rests on three observations. First, the Sphinx sits in alignment with Khafra's pyramid complex at Giza. Second, the face of the Sphinx was long believed to resemble statues of Khafre found at the Cairo Museum. Third, a nearby structure called the Valley Temple shares the same construction style as the Sphinx enclosure. But here is what the official story does not tell you. There is not a single written record from ancient Egypt that names Khafre as the builder of the Sphinx. Not one. The attribution is entirely based on assumption and proximity, and the closer researchers look, the more cracks appear. In the 19th century, French Egyptologist and scholar Gaston Maspero, then director of the Cairo Museum's Antiquities Department, made a bold claim. He stated publicly that Khafre did not build the Sphinx. He merely uncovered it from the sand. Maspero believed the monument already existed when the 4th dynasty pharaohs arrived at Giza. British archaeologist Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie, considered one of the founding fathers of Egyptology, also believed the Sphinx was older than the Old Kingdom. Then there is the matter of scale. The head of the Sphinx is dramatically small compared to its body. The proportions are wrong. Researcher Robert Schoch has proposed that the head we see today is not the original. The original head, far more weathered and eroded, was likely recarved at a later period, possibly into the likeness of a new kingdom pharaoh. The tool marks on the head are measurably newer than those on the body, supporting this theory. If Schoch is correct, we do not even know what the original face looked like. So if not Khafre, then who? Mainstream archaeology has no answer, but ancient tradition does, and the name it offers is one of the most powerful in all of human mythology. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, magic, and time, the divine scribe who recorded the deeds of the dead, the keeper of all cosmic knowledge. In ancient Egyptian theology, Thoth was not merely a deity. He was the architect of reality itself, the intelligence behind the ordering of the universe. Ancient Egyptian texts refer to a legendary era called Zep Tepi, which translates as the first time. This was a golden age that existed before recorded history, when the gods themselves walked the earth and established the foundations of civilization. According to these texts, it was during Zep Tepi that Thoth designed and oversaw the construction of the great monuments at Giza, including the Sphinx, as a physical embodiment of divine knowledge left for future generations to decode. But the most extraordinary claim about Thoth and the Sphinx does not come from Egyptian temple walls. It comes from a collection of texts so ancient and so strange that scholars still argue about whether they should be taken literally or symbolically. These are the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. The Emerald Tablets are among the most enigmatic documents in the history of esoteric literature. The texts claim to have been written by Thoth himself, a being he describes not as a god in the traditional sense, but as an immortal traveler, a master of time and space who has walked the earth across multiple civilizations. The tablets describe his knowledge of the cosmos, the nature of consciousness, the structure of reality, and the secrets of creation. And buried within these texts is a claim that has electrified alternative researchers for decades. Thoth states explicitly that beneath the Sphinx, hidden in a chamber carved into the living rock, he placed the accumulated records of a civilization that existed before the Great Flood. Not just knowledge, not just wisdom, but the complete historical record of an advanced humanity that was erased from the surface of the earth by catastrophe. He called this place the Hall of Records. The tablets describe the location in specific terms. The entrance, Thoth writes, lies beneath the left paw of the Great Guardian, the Lion of the Horizon. The chamber runs deep into the bedrock, sealed against time, waiting for a humanity wise enough to find it and humble enough to understand what it contains. Whether the Emerald Tablets are the literal autobiography of an immortal being, an allegorical text encoding deeper truths, or something else entirely, one thing is undeniable. The description of a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx appears in these texts, and as we will see later in this documentary, modern technology has detected something in exactly that location. Thoth was also known to the ancient Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus, meaning Hermes the thrice greatest. To early Jewish and Christian mystics, he carried echoes of the figure of Enoch, the patriarch who walked with God and was taken up without dying, the keeper of divine secrets. Across 3 major civilizations and thousands of years, the same archetype persists. An ancient being of supreme intelligence who recorded everything and hid the record somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt. The Sphinx does not merely guard the plateau. According to this tradition, it guards the memory of the world. Between the front paws of the Sphinx stands a large granite slab known as the Dream Stele, placed there by the pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1,400 years before the Common Era, more than 1,000 years after Khafra supposedly built the monument. The inscription on the stele tells a remarkable story. A young prince named Thutmose fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx during a hunting trip. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him. It told him that it was suffocating beneath the sand and begged him to clear it. In return, it promised him the throne of Egypt. The prince obeyed. He became pharaoh and commissioned the first recorded restoration of the Sphinx. This story reveals something critical. By 1,400 years before the Common Era, the Sphinx had already been buried under sand for so long that a future pharaoh had to dream about it to remember it was there. And crucially, in the stele's inscription, the Sphinx refers to itself using a name that Egyptologists can only partially read. The surviving text contains a reference to a figure associated with Khafre, but the name of the entity the Sphinx claims to be is damaged and incomplete. What we can confirm is this: the Sphinx was not a fixed, known, continuously maintained monument throughout Egyptian history. It disappeared. It was forgotten. It had to be rediscovered. And when it was rediscovered, even the Egyptians of that era did not fully understand what they were looking at. This pattern of disappearance and rediscovery would repeat again and again across thousands of years. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the historian Herodotus visited Giza and wrote extensive accounts of everything he saw. He described the pyramids in detail. He said nothing about the Sphinx, not a single word. Neither did the geographer Strabo nor the historian Hecataeus, both of whom documented the Giza Plateau in detail. The most likely explanation is that the Sphinx was buried under the sand during their visits. It simply was not visible. The first modern excavation to partially reveal the Sphinx was led in 1817 by Giovanni Battista Caviglia, who commanded a team of 160 workers and managed to expose its chest, but the sand kept flowing back. It was not until the late 1930s that Egyptian archaeologist Émile Baraïs finally freed the entire monument from the desert. Between 1925 and 1936, a team under his leadership completed the full excavation. After centuries of burial, the Sphinx emerged once more into the light. And yet, here is what haunts every serious researcher who studies this monument. The dream stele was placed there by a pharaoh who felt the need to explain his own connection to the Sphinx. Thutmose IV was essentially saying, "I did not build this. I found it. It spoke to me, and I obeyed." Even the most powerful rulers of ancient Egypt approached the Sphinx not as its creators, but as its servants, as people who had inherited something they did not fully understand and could not fully explain. That feeling has never gone away. 3,000 years after Thutmose IV cleared the sand from its body, we are still standing in front of the Sphinx asking the same question he was asking. What are you? Who made you? And what are you guarding? For over a century, Egyptologists assumed the face of the Sphinx was a portrait of Khafre. The proximity to his pyramid, the alignment of the complex, the similar headdress style. It all seemed to point in one direction. Then, in 1993, forensic artist Frank Domingo from the New York Police Department was given access to both the Sphinx and the statue of Khafre in the Cairo Museum. Using forensic facial analysis and computer modeling, Domingo made precise measurements of both faces and compared them point by point. His conclusion was unambiguous. The face of the Sphinx and the face on Khafre's statues belonged to two different people. The angle of the jaw, the shape of the orbital bones, the width of the nose, the proportions between the features. None of them match. Domingo stated clearly that the Sphinx does not represent Khafre. Even more intriguing was his observation about the facial morphology itself. The features of the Sphinx, he noted, are more consistent with West African physiognomy than with the Semitic features typically attributed to Old Kingdom pharaohs. This single observation quietly demolished one of the most comfortable assumptions in mainstream Egyptology. If the face is not Khafre, and if the facial features point toward a West African origin, then the Sphinx may predate the entire dynastic period entirely. This finding aligns with a little-known oral tradition among the Zulu people of southern Africa. The Zulu have long maintained in their ancestral memory that their forebears once ruled all of the Sahara, and that in those ancient days the great desert was green and alive, covered in rivers and grasslands and teeming with life. Mainstream historians dismiss this as mythology, But modern climate science has confirmed that the Sahara was indeed a vast green landscape during the African humid period, which lasted from approximately 10,000 years before the Common Era to approximately 3,000 years before the Common Era. What if the Zulu oral tradition is not mythology at all? What if it is memory? There is one more detail that researchers rarely discuss. The original face of the Sphinx, before whatever recarving may have occurred, was almost certainly larger. The current head is dramatically undersized relative to the body, a disproportion so obvious that even casual visitors notice it. Schoch and others have argued that the original head was recarved, possibly multiple times, reducing it in size with each revision, which means the face we are analyzing today, the face that Domingo compared to Khafre, may itself be a later addition carved over an even older original. We are not even sure we are looking at the first face. We may be looking at a copy of a copy, carved over something far more ancient that we will never see. So, whose face is it? The honest answer, the answer that 3,000 years of inquiry has produced, is this: we do not know. And that answer, unsatisfying as it is, may be the most important thing the Sphinx has to teach us. In the early 1990s, American author and independent Egyptologist John Anthony West was studying the work of French scholar and symbolist René Schwaller de Lubitsch, who had noticed something deeply strange about the surface of the Sphinx. The erosion patterns on its body did not look like wind erosion. They looked like water erosion. Wind-eroded rock has a rough, irregular, sharp-edged appearance. Water-eroded rock has a smooth, undulating, rounded quality, with deep vertical channels carved by flowing water running downward. The walls of the Sphinx enclosure showed exactly this pattern. Deep vertical channels, rounded, wave-like surfaces, the unmistakable signature of heavy, prolonged rainfall. West brought this observation to Robert Schoch, a geologist and professor of natural sciences at Boston University. Schoch came to Egypt skeptical, but left convinced. After examining the erosion patterns firsthand, he concluded that the Sphinx enclosure had indeed been shaped by water, not wind. Specifically by repeated, intense rainfall over a very long period of time. This was explosive, because the Giza Plateau has been a desert for at least 5,000 years. For the Sphinx to show this level of water weathering, it would have to have been built during a period when Northeast Africa still received regular heavy rainfall. And according to climatological research, the last time that was true was before 5,000 years before the Common Era at the very earliest, possibly much earlier. German climate scientists Rudolf Cooper and Stefan Kropelin, analyzing radiocarbon data from across the Sahara, determined that the region was dominated by monsoon rainfall as late as 8,500 years before the Common Era, creating what they called the Green Sahara. A landscape of rivers, grasslands, and forests that attracted human settlement from roughly 10,000 years before the Common Era onward. This Green Sahara ended between 3,500 and 1,500 years before the Common Era as the monsoon belt retreated southward. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx was built somewhere in that window. Not 2,500 years before the Common Era, but perhaps 7,000 years before the Common Era. Perhaps 9,000 years before the Common Era. Perhaps earlier still. Professor Alexander Semeiko of the Academy of Geopolitical Problems in Russia has argued that if the water erosion data is taken at full value, the Sphinx could date to as early as 30,000 years before the Common Era, though most researchers consider this extreme. The implications are staggering, because if the Sphinx predates the Old Kingdom by thousands of years, then someone built it. Someone with the engineering skill, the organizational capacity, and the artistic vision to carve a 73-meter monument from living rock. And that someone is not in any history book. Mainstream Egyptologists have pushed back firmly. Peter der Manuelian, associate curator of the Egyptian department at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, has called the water erosion theory nonsensical, arguing that hundreds of scholars have studied the Giza chronology for over 2 centuries and found no reason to revise it. Egyptologist Lanny Bell of the University of Chicago, who has conducted research in Egypt for over 2 decades, regards the theory with deep skepticism. And there is one objection that the water erosion theory has never fully answered. If the erosion on the Sphinx was caused by rainfall, why do the nearby pyramids, which were supposedly built in the same era according to mainstream archaeology, not show the same erosion patterns? Schoch's response is that the pyramids were built from assembled blocks rather than carved from the bedrock, and that their construction history is fundamentally different from the Sphinx. But the debate continues, and it will continue until someone is allowed to dig deep enough to settle it once and for all. In 1994, Belgian researcher Robert Bauval published a theory that would reshape the entire conversation around Giza. Working from astronomical data, Bauval demonstrated that the 3 pyramids of Giza were not placed randomly. They mirror with extraordinary precision the 3 belt stars of the Orion constellation, including the slight offset of the smallest pyramid, which matches the slight offset of the smallest belt star, Mintaka. But the alignment of the pyramids to Orion is only half the discovery. The other half involves the Sphinx. The Sphinx faces due east toward the rising sun, but more specifically, it faces the point on the horizon where the sun rises at the spring equinox. In the age of the pharaohs, the spring equinox sunrise occurred in the constellation of Taurus. But due to a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, the Earth's axis slowly wobbles over a cycle of roughly 26,000 years, shifting which constellation appears at the equinox horizon. If you run this astronomical clock backward, there is one specific era in which the Sphinx would have stared directly into its own celestial mirror. The age when the spring equinox sunrise occurred in the constellation of Leo, the lion. That era is approximately 10,500 years before the Common Era. The Sphinx has the body of a lion. It faces the exact point on the horizon where the sun rises in Leo during the spring equinox. And this alignment only occurs once every 26,000 years. The last time it occurred was 10,500 years before the Common Era. This has led researchers like Bauval and Graham Hancock to propose that the Sphinx was built, or at minimum conceived and planned, around 10,500 years before the Common Era as a monument to the age of Leo. A timestamp carved in stone, pointing backward to an era that official history insists was populated only by hunter-gatherers. But consider what this means in the context of everything we have already established. The water erosion evidence points to a construction date before 5,000 years, before the Common Era at the earliest. The astronomical alignment points to 10,500 years before the Common Era. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth describe a pre-flood civilization whose records were hidden beneath the Sphinx. Edgar Cayce, working entirely independently, described the same chamber in the same location. And the facial features of the Sphinx, according to forensic analysis, do not match any known pharaoh of the dynastic period. Every single line of evidence, from geology to astronomy to ancient texts to forensic science, points away from the official story. And every single line of evidence points toward the same general conclusion. The Sphinx is far older than we have been told. It was built by a civilization that history has not yet acknowledged, and it was built with a purpose that we have not yet fully understood. Zahi Hawass, longtime head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, has vigorously rejected all of these theories, stating that there is no archaeological evidence whatsoever for an advanced civilization existing in Egypt before the Old Kingdom. But the astronomical alignment itself is not in dispute. The mathematics are verifiable by anyone with the right software. What remains disputed is what that alignment means. And then there is the equinox event itself. During the March or September equinox, if you stand in the eastern desert at sunset, you witness something almost impossible to describe. As the sun descends, it appears to rest on the Sphinx's shoulder and align simultaneously with the southern face of Khafra's pyramid. The shadows of the Sphinx and the pyramid merge into a single silhouette that resembles the profile of a pharaoh wearing a double crown. The Sphinx, in that moment, appears to offer the setting sun to the king whose pyramid stands behind it. This cannot be accidental. Whoever designed this alignment understood celestial geometry at a level that humbles modern architects. And whoever they were, they wanted future generations to look up at the sky and understand that this monument was not built for the moment it was created. It was built for all moments. It was built for us. In 1987, a Japanese team from Waseda University, led by Sakuji Yoshimura, conducted electromagnetic sounding surveys of the Sphinx and its immediate surroundings. Their equipment detected anomalies beneath the monument. Cavities, passages, spaces that should not be there if the Sphinx were simply a solid block of carved rock. The findings pointed to at least 3 significant subsurface features. A tunnel running from the rear of the Sphinx toward the pyramid complex, a large cavity beneath the left paw, and, most intriguingly, a passage descending beneath the right paw and leading toward what appeared to be a large chamber deep within the bedrock. But before we go beneath the stone, we need to go back to the source. Because the existence of what lies under the Sphinx was not first suggested by a Japanese university in 1987. It was described in detail thousands of years ago by Thoth himself. In the Emerald Tablets, Thoth does not speak vaguely about hidden knowledge. He speaks with the precision of someone who built something and wants to make sure it is eventually found. He describes the moment he made the decision to hide the records. He had watched a great civilization fall, not gradually, not through slow decline, but suddenly, catastrophically, erased by a cataclysm so total that almost nothing survived. No buildings, no texts, no memory. The world that had existed before the flood was gone as completely as if it had never been. Thoth writes that he gathered what he could, not objects, not gold, not the monuments of that lost world, because those were already beneath the waves. What he gathered was knowledge, the accumulated understanding of a humanity that had reached heights we have not yet recovered. Their science, their cosmology, their understanding of the nature of consciousness and the structure of the universe. Their history stretching back not thousands, but tens of thousands of years. All of it recorded, preserved, and carried forward by one being who refused to let it be lost forever. He chose the Sphinx as the guardian of this archive, not randomly but deliberately. The Sphinx was already ancient even in Thoth's time, a monument left by an earlier age, oriented to the heavens with a precision that would endure for as long as the earth itself endured. To place the records beneath it was to place them beneath the most permanent marker he could find. A monument that said, in the language of stone and stars, "This place matters. This place is where the answer is buried." The Emerald Tablets describe the Hall of Records in terms that go far beyond a simple underground room. Thoth speaks of a space carved into the living rock beneath the left paw of the Sphinx, accessible through a passage that descends at an angle into the bedrock before opening into a chamber of considerable size. The chamber, he writes, is sealed not merely with stone, but with what he describes as a field of force, an energy barrier placed around the entrance that would repel anyone who approached with impure intention or insufficient understanding. This is not metaphor. Thoth is describing a physical mechanism of protection, something that would render the entrance invisible or inaccessible to those who were not ready to receive what was inside. Inside the Hall of Records, according to the tablets, are not scrolls or papyrus documents. Those would have decayed over the timescales Thoth was thinking about. Instead, he describes records inscribed on imperishable material, tablets of a substance he calls living crystal, capable of holding not just text, but complete experiential knowledge. Not just words describing a truth, but the truth itself, encoded in a medium that could transmit understanding directly to a prepared mind. He describes instruments of knowledge that are incomprehensible in terms of any technology we currently possess. He describes star maps, records of civilizations that existed before the last ice age, the complete history of human consciousness on this planet, from its earliest origins to the moment of the great catastrophe that erased everything. And then Thoth writes something that has haunted researchers for decades. He says the Hall of Records will not be found until humanity has reached a level of spiritual and intellectual development sufficient to use what is inside it responsibly. He says the records are protected not just by physical barriers, but by the nature of consciousness itself. A mind that approaches the chamber with greed, with the desire for power, with the intention to use the knowledge for domination, will not find it. The entrance will not reveal itself. The passage will not open. The chamber will remain sealed for another age. He writes, only those who have mastered themselves will be permitted to master the knowledge of the world. This is a claim that cannot be tested scientifically, but it may explain something that has puzzled researchers for decades. Why, despite electromagnetic surveys, ground-penetrating radar, and decades of excavation in the immediate area, has nothing been conclusively found? Is it possible that the barrier Thoth described is real? Not supernatural, but technological? A field of some kind, generated by a mechanism we do not yet understand, that actively conceals the entrance from instruments and eyes that are not calibrated to perceive it? Now consider Edgar Cayce. Working in deep trance states in the 1930s and 40s, with no access to the Emerald Tablets and no knowledge of the Waseda University surveys that would not happen for another 50 years, Cayce described the Hall of Records in terms that align with Thoth's description in ways that are difficult to explain as coincidence. Cayce said the Hall of Records was located beneath the right paw of the Sphinx. He said it contained the complete history of Atlantis, a civilization he described as technologically advanced, spiritually sophisticated, and destroyed by a catastrophe of their own, making approximately 10,500 years before the Common Era. He said the records were preserved on tablets of an imperishable material. He said the chamber was sealed and protected in a way that would prevent accidental discovery. He said it would be found when 3 specific individuals, souls who had been present at the original construction, were reincarnated simultaneously and drawn to the site. He said the discovery would not be made by force or by technology alone. It would be made by recognition, by a mind that already knew, on some level, what it was looking for. Thoth wrote that the records are protected by consciousness itself. Cayce said the records will be found by consciousness itself. 2 sources, 2 eras, 1 description. In 1999, a ground-penetrating radar survey confirmed the presence of a rectangular cavity beneath the left front paw of the Sphinx, measuring approximately 9 meters by 12 meters. Dr. Youssef Aouyan confirmed the existence of a chamber in that area based on independent analysis. Zahi Hawass acknowledged finding tunnels and passages beneath the main body of the Sphinx during excavations in the 1990s, but concluded they were natural formations and halted the investigation. Then there are the accounts from local workers and guides at Giza, passed down across generations. They describe a corridor entering from beneath the right paw that leads downward before branching into 3 separate tunnels, at least one of which reportedly connects to the interior of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Those who claim to have entered this passage describe reaching a point where further movement becomes impossible, not because of a physical barrier that can be seen or touched, but because of an overwhelming and inexplicable force, an unbearable fear rising from nowhere, violent nausea, complete loss of motor control, uncontrollable trembling that stops the moment they retreat. Is this the field of force Thoth described? Is this the protection mechanism placed around the entrance to the Hall of Records to turn back those who are not ready? We cannot say, but the consistency of these accounts across decades and across different individuals who had no contact with each other is not easy to explain away. In response to these reports, Egyptian scientists reportedly conducted radar sweeps of the area and detected a series of subterranean levels extending to a depth equivalent to a 12-story building. The investigation was terminated shortly afterward. The reasons given were not made public. What are they afraid of finding? Or perhaps the better question is this: what has already been found that we are not being told about? Every generation produces new attempts to solve the Sphinx, and every generation finds that the monument resists explanation. But not all theories are created equal. Some are the product of fantasy. Others are the product of serious research that the academic establishment has chosen to ignore rather than engage with honestly. And a few occupy a strange middle ground where the evidence is real, but the conclusions remain permanently beyond proof. Zecharia Sitchin, author of the Earth Chronicles series, spent decades arguing that the ancient Sumerian texts described the arrival on Earth of an extraterrestrial civilization he called the Anunnaki. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, genetically engineered humanity as a labor force, and were responsible for the sudden explosion of complex civilization in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Under this framework, the Sphinx is not a human creation at all. It is an installation, a marker, a monument left by beings whose understanding of engineering, astronomy, and genetics was so far beyond our own that ancient humans could only describe them as gods. Sitchin's translations of Sumerian texts have been heavily criticized by professional Assyriologists, who argue that his interpretations are selective and frequently incorrect. But the core question he raises, which is why complex civilization appears so suddenly and so fully formed in the archaeological record with no clear developmental precursor, remains unanswered by mainstream archaeology. Alternative historians, including Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, have proposed a different but equally radical theory. They argue that the Sphinx, the pyramids, and several other ancient monuments around the world are the surviving remnants of a global civilization that was destroyed approximately 12,000 years ago by a cosmic impact event. This event, which Hancock calls a catastrophe cycle, triggered massive flooding, dramatic climate shifts, and the near-total erasure of whatever civilization existed before it. The survivors scattered. Some reached Egypt, some reached Mesopotamia, some reached the Americas, and wherever they arrived, they carried with them the knowledge of the world that had been lost, encoding it into monuments, myths, and sacred traditions that would survive until a future humanity was ready to decode them. This theory received unexpected scientific support in recent years when researchers associated with the Comet Research Group published evidence suggesting that a fragmented comet struck the Earth approximately 12,800 years ago, triggering an impact winter, massive wildfires, and the extinction of numerous large animal species. This event, known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, is still debated among scientists. But its existence as a serious scientific proposition gives Hancock's timeline a degree of geological plausibility that his critics have struggled to dismiss. If a catastrophic cosmic impact did occur 12,800 years ago, and if there was an advanced civilization on Earth at that time, then the complete absence of their physical remains in the archaeological record is exactly what we would expect. A global catastrophe of that magnitude would not leave ruins. It would leave only the monuments that were too large and too deeply embedded in the bedrock to be destroyed. Monuments like the Sphinx. Then there is Boriska Kiprianovich, born in Russia on January the 11th, 1996. From an early age, Boriska described vivid memories of a previous life on Mars. He spoke about a Martian civilization that had been destroyed by nuclear war and claimed he had been deliberately reborn on Earth as part of a mission to prevent humanity from making the same mistake. He warned that if humanity did not change course, it would face the same fate as the civilization he remembered. Boriska made a specific claim about the Sphinx that has never been fully explained. He said that behind the right ear of the monument there is a mechanism, a lever or activation point of some kind, and that when this mechanism is engaged, something within the Sphinx will be unlocked that will fundamentally alter the course of human civilization. He described this not as a metaphor, but as a literal physical mechanism, built into the stone by those who constructed the monument, waiting for the right moment and the right hands to activate it. No mainstream scientist takes this claim seriously. Boriska's account cannot be verified, and his descriptions of Mars are inconsistent with everything planetary science has established about that planet. But there is one detail that is difficult to simply discard. The location Boriska identifies for this mechanism, behind and beneath the right ear of the Sphinx, corresponds with an area that multiple independent surveys have flagged as anomalous. Not the paw, not the chest, the area around the head, specifically the right side. Whether this is coincidence, whether Boriska somehow had access to information about the survey results, or whether there is something else entirely at work, we cannot determine. But it is a detail that sits uncomfortably in the mind once you have encountered it. And then there are the ancient giant theories. Certain alternative researchers, drawing on accounts from Arab historians of the medieval period, have proposed that the Sphinx and the pyramids were built not by normal humans, but by a race of giants who inhabited the ancient world before the flood. These researchers point to passages in ancient texts from multiple cultures, including the Bible, the Book of Enoch, Sumerian tablets, and pre-Columbian American traditions that describe a pre-flood humanity of enormous physical stature and superhuman capability. Under this theory, the scale of the Sphinx and the precision of the pyramid construction are not mysteries at all. They are exactly what you would expect from beings whose physical dimensions and cognitive capacities dwarfed our own. This theory is impossible to evaluate scientifically in the absence of physical evidence. But it is worth noting that the Book of Enoch, one of the oldest texts in the Judeo-Christian tradition, describes in considerable detail a pre-flood world populated by hybrid beings of enormous size and power, the offspring of divine beings and human women. And the Book of Enoch was not fringe literature. It was considered sacred scripture by the earliest Christians and was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggesting it was central to the religious life of at least some Jewish communities in the centuries around the Common Era. Whether giants built the Sphinx, whether extraterrestrials built it, whether survivors of a lost civilization built it, or whether an unknown human culture built it, using techniques we have not yet understood, the same fundamental question persists. We do not know who built it. We do not know when. We do not know why. And every theory that tries to fill that void, no matter how strange, is responding to a real absence in the official record. An absence that mainstream archaeology has chosen to paper over with assumptions rather than confront with honesty. The nose of the Sphinx is gone. Forensic analysis of the surviving stone shows that it was removed deliberately, using iron rods and chisels, sometime between the 3rd and 10th centuries of the Common Era. The most widely accepted historical account attributes this act to a Sufi Muslim named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dahr, who allegedly destroyed the nose after witnessing local farmers making offerings to the Sphinx in hopes of a good harvest, a practice he considered idolatrous. The medieval Arab historian al-Makrizi, writing in the 15th century of the Common Era, recorded this account in detail. He added that the destruction of the nose was followed almost immediately by a catastrophic sandstorm that buried much of the Giza Plateau, which local people interpreted as divine punishment for the act of desecration. The sand that had buried the Sphinx for centuries had returned, as if the monument itself had called it back in response to the violation of its face. Napoleon's cannons are frequently blamed in popular culture. This is false. Sketches made by European artists who visited Egypt before Napoleon's 1898 campaign already show the Sphinx without its nose. The damage predates Napoleon by centuries. This particular myth is one of many that have attached themselves to the Sphinx over the years, displacing the more complicated and less satisfying truth. The ceremonial beard is a separate matter entirely. Fragments of it were discovered during excavations in the 19th century. Analysis of the mounting point on the chin of the Sphinx suggests the beard was not part of the original carving, but was added at a later date, possibly during the New Kingdom period, as part of an effort to associate the monument with the reigning religious iconography of the time. One significant fragment of this beard is now held in the British Museum in London. Another fragment is in the Cairo Museum. The two pieces do not fit together perfectly, suggesting either that there were multiple beards installed over different periods, or that the surviving fragments represent only a portion of an original that has mostly been lost. Now consider what the Sphinx actually looked like when it was new. Red pigment is still visible in traces on the face. Archaeological analysis confirms that the entire face was once painted red. Yellow and blue pigment traces on the body indicate that the monument was once fully and brilliantly colored. Researchers believe the body was painted yellow to represent the golden coat of a lion, with blue and red accents marking specific features. The Nemes headdress, the royal cloth covering, was likely painted in alternating blue and gold stripes. The face, that enormous, solemn, watching face, was red. Ancient visitors to Giza did not see the pale, weather-beaten, noseless guardian that stands there today. They saw something vivid and overwhelming. A colossus of color rising from the desert floor, its face burning red in the morning sun, its body striped in gold and blue, its eyes, which were almost certainly inlaid with some reflective material, catching the light and seeming to move as the angle of the sun changed across the day. It did not look like a ruin. It looked alive. We have been looking at a ghost for so long that we have forgotten it was ever anything else. The Sphinx is also slowly and irreversibly dying. Groundwater from a nearby canal that was improperly discharged into the surrounding soil began seeping into the bedrock beneath the monument in the late 20th century. The water carries dissolved salts deep into the porous limestone. As the water evaporates, the salts crystallize inside the stone, expanding as they solidify and fracturing the rock from within. Large chunks of limestone have been breaking away from the lower body of the Sphinx as a result of this process. The damage is not cosmetic. It is structural, and it is accelerating. Zahi Hawass, alerted to the severity of the threat, ordered workers to drill drainage channels into the surrounding rock to lower the water table and redirect the flow away from the monument. At the crisis point, the water level was only 4.5 meters below the base of the Sphinx. 4.5 meters. A monument that may have survived for 10,000 years or 30,000 years or longer was nearly destroyed by a drainage pipe. The repairs slowed the damage. They did not stop it. The Sphinx continues to lose material from its surface every year. The limestone from which it was carved is soft and porous, vulnerable to moisture, salt, pollution, and the vibrations generated by the millions of tourists who visit the site annually. Conservation efforts are ongoing but inadequate. The resources devoted to protecting this monument are a fraction of what would be required to genuinely stabilize it. And here is the final irony. The thing that preserved the Sphinx for most of its existence was the very thing that seemed to be erasing it. The sand. For thousands of years, buried beneath the desert, Protected from wind and rain and human hands, the Sphinx was essentially frozen in time. Every period of burial was a period of preservation. Every excavation, every clearing of the sand, every effort to make it visible and accessible exposed it to the forces that are destroying it. The monument that waited so long to be seen may now be dying from being seen too much. Here is what we know for certain about the Great Sphinx of Giza. It is 73 meters long. Its face is approximately 5 meters wide. It faces east. It has been buried and rediscovered multiple times across thousands of years. Its nose was deliberately removed sometime between the 3rd and 10th centuries of the Common Era. Its original color was red and yellow and blue. There are cavities beneath it that have been detected by multiple independent surveys. Not a single ancient Egyptian text from the Old Kingdom mentions it by name. Its face does not match the statues of the pharaoh it is said to represent. The erosion on its body is inconsistent with the climate of the last 5,000 years. And somewhere in the texts of one of the most ancient mystical traditions on earth, a being who claimed to have built it wrote that he hid the memory of a lost world beneath its paws. Everything else is theory. And that is exactly the point. In a world where every ruin has a placard and every mystery has a Wikipedia page, the Sphinx remains genuinely, stubbornly, profoundly unknown. It does not fit cleanly into any timeline. It does not answer to any dynasty. It predates our explanations for it. And it will continue to do so until we are willing to ask harder questions than the ones we have been asking. Because here is what the last century of Sphinx research has actually demonstrated. Not what the Sphinx is, but what it is not. It is not simply a monument commissioned by a 4th dynasty pharaoh to guard his pyramid. The evidence against that conclusion is now so substantial, drawn from so many independent disciplines, that maintaining it requires a level of motivated ignorance that does not belong in serious scholarship. The face is not Khafra. The erosion is not consistent with a construction date of 2,500 years before the Common Era. The astronomical alignment does not point to the age of the pharaohs. The proportions of the head and body do not match. And the complete silence of Old Kingdom records on the most conspicuous monument in all of Egypt is not an accident of preservation. It is a message. The message is this: we did not build it, we found it, and we did not fully understand it either. That is the most haunting truth about the Sphinx. Not that it is mysterious to us, but that it was mysterious to the people who lived in its shadow for thousands of years. The greatest civilization the ancient world produced, a culture of extraordinary intellectual and artistic achievement, looked at the Sphinx and felt the same thing we feel when we look at it today. Awe, confusion, the vertiginous sense of looking at something that should not exist, something that arrived from outside the boundaries of the world they knew. Thoth wrote in the Emerald Tablets that the Hall of Records will be opened when humanity is ready, not when it is powerful enough, not when its technology is sophisticated enough, when it is ready, when it has developed the wisdom to use what is inside without destroying itself in the process. That condition, he implied, was not guaranteed. It was possible that humanity would destroy itself first. It was possible that the records would remain sealed forever, waiting for a consciousness that never came. We are living in the age that Thoth was writing toward. We have the technology to scan every cubic centimeter of rock beneath the Sphinx without moving a single grain of sand. We have ground-penetrating radar, muon tomography, seismic imaging, electromagnetic sounding. We have every tool we would need to answer the question once and for all. What is down there? And we are choosing not to look. That choice, that persistent, institutionally enforced, politically motivated choice not to look, is itself a kind of answer. Whatever is beneath the Sphinx, someone with the authority to decide these things has concluded that the world is not yet ready to know about it. Whether that conclusion is protective or self-serving, or simply the product of bureaucratic inertia, we cannot say. But it echoes, with uncomfortable precision, what Thoth wrote thousands of years ago. The records will not be found until humanity is ready. And humanity apparently is not ready yet. But consider this. Every generation that has stood before the Sphinx has been the generation that almost knew, the generation that came close, the generation that had more information than any before it and still could not cross the final threshold. We are that generation now. We are standing at the edge of the answer. We can see the shape of it. We can feel the weight of it. We are one excavation permit, one honest investigation, one courageous decision away from knowing something that would change everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from. The Sphinx has been waiting for 12,000 years, or 30,000 years, or longer. It has watched every civilization that rose in its shadow eventually fall. It has outlasted every empire that believed itself permanent. It has kept its secret through floods and sandstorms and wars and the slow grinding erosion of time itself. It is not in a hurry. But perhaps we should be, because the monument that survived everything is now being eaten from within by groundwater and salt crystals and the footsteps of tourists. The stone is failing. The record written in the living rock is being lost line by line, layer by layer, year by year. Whatever the Sphinx is guarding, it will not guard it forever. And when it is gone, the question it was built to answer will be gone with it. This has been splinters of time. The past is not behind us. It is beneath our feet. Before you go, take a moment to consider what you just encountered. Not a story, not a theory, a question that has outlasted every civilization that ever tried to answer it. If this documentary made you think, made you doubt, made you look at the official version of history a little differently, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Like and subscribe if you want to keep exploring these mysteries with us. Every comment, every share, every new face in this community means the world to us. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in the next one.